Hello, good morning, and welcome to another episode of Better Together, a conversation about getting back to live. Today, I'm joined by Alan Law. Say good morning, Alan.
Good morning, David.
How are you today?
I'm okay, thanks very much, David.
Excellent, excellent. So we had one of these conversations last year, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope people enjoyed it as well. I think there's some really interesting and useful information that you were able to share. How have things been with you since last we spoke? It was about May last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, Dave. Well, like it's all not particularly easy for any of us. They're challenging times. We've been more fortunate than many suppliers, being working in event safety. There's been a reasonable amount of work. Obviously, most of it's COVID related. The government's requirement for a COVID risk assessment to be undertaken by all employees, all in companies, has kind of kept us ticking over. We worked last October on the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall, and then we worked on the ATP tennis at the O2. Obviously, no audiences present, but it was work particularly for some of the more stretched technical disciplines.
Wow, what was that like, being on site with real people in the real world? I mean, so many of us are craving that right now.
Well, it was quite a culture shock, obviously. We'd been sort of sitting on our hands for nearly 6 months before we got to that position. I think a lot of the guys and girls on site found it quite difficult having to work a 12-hour day. They sat on their sofas for so long.
Gig fitness was suffering a little bit there then.
With their elasticated waist trousers on. I think they found it very difficult. I think on some of the events I worked on were, the virtual events were just purely virtual. And as I always say, virtual events are a bit like vegetarian sausages. Not quite like the real thing, Dave.
It's not the same as meeting together, is it? It's just not at all.
No, it was, the role was very strange. In some cases we were just COVID policemen, which was, unpleasant, really. It wasn't very rewarding. And nobody really wants a middle-aged ball man telling them not to stand too close to their colleagues or put their face covering on. Yeah. So that wasn't a lot of fun, to be honest. But yes, we have a few other events of varied nature. Some interesting brand activations where they were a bit creative, putting delegates in cars and driving them into venues, and staging activations around the car. A particular phone company was doing a launch tail end of last year, and that was a very interesting
more like
event
a stunt PR type of thing. Cool.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think there's been some interesting.
It's really encouraging. I think that people are doing things. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Not in the volume, obviously, that they were, but there is things happening. Yeah. I think the other thing, looking forward, I think, looking backwards rather, sorry. In February, there was a report, and I don't know if many people saw it, that was issued by ESSA and Plaza, and it was a research they did on the impact of lockdown on the events industry. They published this report in February. It makes very, very sobering reading. And I wouldn't mind just covering a couple of the key points, Dave, because I think, they are worth knowing. Yeah, so the report found 72% of companies and freelancers reported only approximately 3 to 4 months left of liquidity. 66% of organisers and agencies said they cannot run any of their events sustainably. Less than 6% of the event companies say they can operate profitably under existing COVID and social distancing regulations. And the final finding, which I found the most disturbing personally, was 63% of the workforce in supply companies was made redundant at the end of December. And this is likely to rise to 80% at the end of this first quarter in 2021. So I found that very, very unsettling.
I mean, it's shocking and it's absolutely horrendous. And I think we hear stories all the time from friends, colleagues, people we've worked with for decades or more. Of taking COVID jobs, of having to find other ways to make ends meet in the meantime. I mean, what do you think of, I guess, the government support and what they've been able to put in place? Like, do you think that does much to help the situation?
Well, to be honest, David, my thoughts are kind of mixed. I mean, the furlough scheme was excellent. They kicked it in very quickly, and it kept a lot of event companies held on to that, which they would not have been able, quite frankly, been able to hang on to. So that was good. The grants for self-employed people were good. I mean, I spoke to lots of freelancers who benefited from those, and it kept the wolf from the door, kept the mortgage payments being paid, and so on and so forth. I think sadly, sort of small limited companies have been slightly overlooked. I think that's because the government generally works on databases when it's working out what support to give people, and they use the PAYE database, I understand. And obviously, if you're a director of a limited company and only paid PAYE annually, you didn't get very much support at all. But I would say overall, it hasn't been bad.
Yeah. Do you see people being able to get back to where they were? I mean, do you think that companies and freelancers are going to be able to get back to a kind of positive trading position following June 21st? I mean, it's not just going to bounce back instantly, is it? I mean, things have fundamentally changed now. How do you see things kind of starting to develop following June 21st?
Interesting question, Dave. I think the government's roadmap was a real game changer. I think it was the first time a considered, well put together document has been created, explaining the methodology, if you will, of how these restrictions are going to be lifted. I'm sure you're aware there's 4 steps taking us up to the 21st of June. We've already achieved step 1. Step 2 is going to be achieved April time. For each of these steps to be moved forward, we have to satisfy 4 tests, government tests. And these are quite well thought out, in my opinion, quite pragmatic, put it that way. And I'd just like to take you through them because maybe people aren't fully aware. So for us to move from one step to the next, the first thing we've got to achieve is the vaccine deployment program continues successfully. Well, I think we're all impressed with the speed at which the vaccination process has gone out. I've got clients in their 40s that have been called up. We're told, approaching half the population has been vaccinated. And yesterday's news was good news. If you've had the AstraZeneca, what my son calls the Kung Flu jab, that was all very good news. The second test, if you will, is evidence shows that vaccines are sufficiently effective in reducing hospitalised deaths in those vaccinated. Well, first time this week we've seen deaths drop to 2 figures, which is incredibly encouraging. So everything's heading in the right direction there. And this, I think this particular test was very, very key. Infection rates do not risk a surge in hospitalisations, which would put unsustainable pressure on the NHS. So the government's kind of saying, look, we know there might be an increase in infection once the kids go back to school, once we're allowed back in restaurants and pubs and one after another. But unless it causes an unsustainable pressure on the UK, we're going to press on, which I think is great. And then the final one is the UK government assessed the risks not fundamentally changed by new variants of the virus. Well, we've said a lot about the South African variant and the Brazilian variant. I think from what I understand, the vaccines are coping with them. And I see these not being a particular issue. Also, they're developing the vaccines all the time. We've got 2 new ones coming out in the next month or so, one of which is made in Newcastle, which is a 1 jab vaccination. So that's all very positive. So I glean from that, I do think we will be, as far as the government's concerned, out of this by June the 21st. However, I don't think people's behaviours will suddenly change on the 22nd of June somehow. With lots of clients, we talk about. It'll take a while, won't it? Yeah, lots of clients we talk about the COVID.
Oh, sorry, say that again. The COVID legacy.
The COVID legacy, which is basically where will we be at? What will be the behaviours of the delegates, of the event attendees, as of the 22nd of June? And I think many people attitudes have changed to their work-life balance. I think for many people who historically have attended events, their work is central to their sense of self. their meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And I believe this has been significantly impacted by long periods of time being at home, sitting on the sofa. I think things that won't change or will take some time, some behaviours that will take time to change, that are, for example, resistance to international travel. I'm not quite sure how many people will be comfortable getting back in an aeroplane. I know, speaking personally, I'm not ready yet to get onto an aeroplane. Also, we need to see how the vaccination rollout goes out in Europe and abroad to see how that would be, that's possible. Then, reluctance to staying away from home. People wanting to stay in hotels. Maybe once again, we'll look at shorter events, starting later, finishing earlier. And so that allows people to get home or back to their place of work. And the continued expectations from social distancing and face coverings. I mean, I think, I was talking to a client the other day, you can't imagine a time when you meet somebody and you shake their hand. And that's something that's embedded in our
so
persona.
strange, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back hundreds of years. I believe it was a show that you didn't have a concealed weapon, I believe. But, but it seems so alien now. And face coverings, I mean, people's understanding of face coverings, Dave, is extraordinary. We see people in their own personal private cars, on their own, driving them with face coverings on. And I think the most extreme example I came across was, I do a lot of work with Eastnor Castle up in Herefordshire, and they opened up for a Halloween event in October last year. And one of the event managers got me down to the courtyard of the castle and said, "You've got to see this man." So there was a middle-aged lady there, and she had a face covering on, very pretty. She'd obviously made it herself, a floral number. And I looked down, and she had a dog on a lead, and the dog also had a matching face.
No way.
No.
Amazing. It is amazing what people do.
Some of the behaviours are going to take a little bit of changing, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I guess the other thing that people are going to be getting used to is the COVID testing regimes. And how do you think, I guess testing and some kind of vaccination passport, how do you think that might play out in the coming months and years?
Well, I think testing clearly is not the silver bullet we all thought it might be a few months ago. And I use the expression to clients, we were a bit like a drowning man hanging onto a lifebelt. And, testing, we're going to test, so we go ahead with this event. The more I learn about testing, the less I know, quite frankly. It is horrendously complicated and it is fast-moving. We have the pros and cons of the PCR test, which is basically a DNA test, which is highly accurate but expensive and takes a while, 24 hours to turn it around. Another drawback with that particular test is it'll pick up the virus, because it's so accurate, it'll pick up the virus when you've had it 3-4 months ago. So you'll test positive when you're fit and well. Big problem, by the way, for the NHS. Big problem for them. Then you get the lateral flow tests, which are less accurate, like 75%, but much cheaper. I think you're paying £5-6 for a test now. 15-minute turnaround. You don't need a clinician to administer them. But as I say, not as accurate. On events where they've been used, and I've worked on lots of events where they've been used, we've had false negatives, we've had conflicting results, we've had PCRs testing positive and lateral flow testing negative, and vice versa, which is only very unusual, but it happened. Caused all sorts of problems on an event with a large telecoms company in February, where we had to send home the UK communications director as he tested positive on a lateral flow. He went for the NHS PCR and he was tested negative. So you can imagine that was a little difficult conversation for the agency. I mean, my hope, Dave, is because of the extraordinary pace in which the vaccination rollout's going, testing will become slightly irrelevant, become obsolete. The end won't justify the means, if you will, because all it ever was, Dave, was an additional mitigation, a different control level. It wasn't saying, well, if you test, then you don't have to wear a face cover. If you test, then you don't have to be socially distanced. It was an added. So I think it become less relevant as the vaccination passport comes
I guess
about.
that'll depend a bit on, it'll become more of a choice, I suppose, for people, I guess, and it'll be a bit more subject to the nature of the event that people are planning as well, perhaps. Presumably with any public events, there'll almost be, especially if we get into a vaccination passport type of scenario, then people will kind of be responsible for making sure their own vaccination passport is up to date, just to be able to go to the cinema or go to a restaurant or go to a public space. So I guess in that sense, hopefully that means there'll be less need for it in events. But I presume in corporate events especially, there's probably still going to be quite a high bar that needs to be set for safety, in the same way that it's set quite high for health and safety as well, when they're sending their employees or sending their staff to attend an event. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out, I suppose. I asked you back last year in May if you had a single message for the industry. If I asked you that again today, what would your response be?
Well, good question, Dave. Good question. Well, I believe we are at the beginning of the end. I'm sure you're all aware that Isle of Wight Festival, Leeds and Reading festivals are all being staged later on in the year, August and September. So that's good news. I've got a live event festival on the South Coast in the bank holiday weekend. I thought it was quite encouraging. Melvin Ben, some of you might have heard this interview. Melvin Ben is the festival director for Festival Republic. When asked by the media a couple of weeks ago what control measures were they going to have in place for the festivals or his festivals, he said none at all. And his response was, the government said we don't need to do anything as of the 21st of June, so we're not doing anything. Whatever we make of that is interesting, but I think it's very positive message. I think the other thing, just a quick point on testing, Dave. I think these big events realise the logistics of testing a lot of people don't work. You can't test that many people.
So difficult.
Logistics, the time it takes. I mean, I worked a bit with Shaftesbury Avenue Theatre a couple of weeks ago, and they worked out if they were going to socially distance a queue to enable testing to take place in their theatre foyer, the queue would be 600 metres long. In the West End, that's never going to work. It's never going to work. So I think that's another area where
really
I can't see. No, it'll be all about showing your green passport. I think that we'll see a lot more of that. Having said that, I think the pandemic has caused a massive reset in the way people work. I mean, the number of people that are prepared to go back into offices, as we all know, is significantly reduced. I mean, I think I read recently it's only 64% of people are prepared to go back into the office 2 days a week. So that's an interesting one. And anecdotally, a client of mine was telling me about the HSBC building in Canada Square. I'm sure a lot of you know that, over in the East City. Huge building, 59 floors, I believe, and banker lifts that get you onto the floors. They did a sort of time and motion study, if you will, to see if they had all of the employees socially distanced within the lifts, how long it would take to access the building. And they worked out if they started loading the lifts at 8 o'clock in the morning, it would be 6:15 in the evening before every employee was in the building. And that's not going to change it.
It's madness. It's madness. That doesn't work, does it?
A bit like when I went back on about handshaking. Who wants to be crushed in a lift? You don't want to do that. You'll sat there, I'll wait for the next one. No. But on a positive note, I've got a couple of agencies that are of the view, because we won't be going into the offices in the same way we used to, there'll be a greater appetite, if you will, demand for events. Because we still need social interaction. We still need people on people face to face. So if you're not doing it in the work environment, I think the events will be smaller, but I think they'll be a lot more regular and a lot more regional. So I think there's a positive to be drawn out of that. And if I could just, on a personal note, cover something. I mean, over the past 12 months, I've been personally quite humbled and overwhelmed by the resilience of our event colleagues. Quite extraordinary. I've heard of event directors, hello Anna, if you're listening, who are working on the tills at Waitrose.
It is absolutely incredible to see. No, absolutely. It's incredible.
Creative directors working in test centres. Hello, Sandra. And when I went for my vaccination, there was an event producer, hello, David, volunteering. Quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. I mean, the industry we work in is extraordinary. The people we work with, Dave, are extraordinary. In our sector, we've taken a battering, financially, mentally, emotionally. However, the event industry has demonstrated throughout this period its tremendous resourcefulness, its resilience, and its determination, David. And I think if I had a single message is, hang on in there. We're nearly through. We're nearly out of this terrible time.
Brilliant, Al. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me again today. And that was an incredibly heartfelt message. So thank you for that. We'd love to hear from different people across the industry. So please do get in touch if you'd like to join this conversation. But thank you to Al for now. Goodbye, Al.
Bye, David.
Take care. Speak to you soon.